The sun was sinking low over the dry plains, turning everything red and gold. The air was heavy with dust, the kind that stuck to your throat and made every breath feel like a struggle. A young girl stood in the open, trembling, her face covered in dirt and tears. Her dress was torn, her knees scraped, and her hands shook as she tried to shield herself. But it didn't matter because the man in front of her didn't care. He was older, cruel, with a face burned by sun and anger. In his hand he held a long leather whip that gleamed in the dying light. "Maybe now you'll learn some manners," the man said with a sneer. His voice was rough and his eyes were cold. He raised the whip slowly, savoring her fear. The girl's lips trembled, but she didn't scream this time. She had already learned that screaming only made them laugh harder. Her heart pounded in her chest as the wind carried the sound of the whip cutting the air. But before the blow could land, a voice broke through the heavy silence. "Put it down." It wasn't loud, but it carried weight like thunder far away. The man froze, turning around with a scowl. Standing by the fence was a cowboy, tall and quiet, dust clinging to his coat and boots. His wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow over his eyes, but even from a distance you could see they were steady and sharp. He had a revolver in his hand, the barrel pointed straight ahead. "Who the hell are you?" the man shouted, but his voice wavered slightly. "Doesn't matter," the cowboy said. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "Let the girl go," the man laughed bitterly. "You planning to play hero, stranger? You got no business here." He took a step forward, the whip still in his hand. The cowboy's hand didn't shake. He thumbed the hammer of his revolver, and the click echoed across the silent plain. "I said, put it down." For a moment, the world held its breath. Even the wind stopped moving. The girl didn't dare blink. Then the whip fell to the ground, but not because the man dropped it. The shot came quick, one sharp crack that tore through the air like lightning. The man stumbled back, clutching his arm, and fell to the dust with a cry. The revolver's smoke curled in the golden light, and the cowboy didn't move. His eyes still locked on the man. "Next one won't miss," he said quietly. The man cursed, dragging himself backward, fear twisting his face. He spat in the dust, then ran, limping, clutching his arm until he disappeared behind the ridge. Silence filled the air again. The cowboy lowered his gun, spinning it once before holstering it. Then finally he turned to the girl. She was still frozen in place, her breath coming in short gasps. "You all right?" he asked. The girl tried to speak, but no words came out. Tears welled in her eyes and she shook her head. Her voice had long forgotten how to answer kindness. He sighed, walking closer. Up close, he looked worn, like a man who had seen too much of life and carried it on his shoulders. His shirt was faded, his hands rough from work, but his eyes were kind. He took off his hat and knelt slightly so he wouldn't tower over her. "Ain't no reason to fear me, miss," he said softly. "You're safe now." Safe. That word hit her harder than the whip ever did. She hadn't heard it in years. The girl's legs gave way and she sank to her knees, crying quietly into her hands. The cowboy didn't rush her, didn't speak again. He just stood there, the fading light painting his figure like a shadow out of an old story. When her sobs began to fade, he spoke again. "Got a cabin a few miles north. You can rest there. You look like you could use a warm fire and some food." She looked up, eyes wide and uncertain. "Why?" she whispered, voice small and broken. The cowboy's gaze softened. "Because nobody deserves a beating for breathing," he said simply. For a long moment she just stared at him, the man who had stepped out of nowhere, who had risked his life for a stranger. Then she nodded slowly, wiping her tears. As the last light of the sun disappeared behind the hills, the cowboy turned his horse toward the north, and the girl followed him through the quiet, dusty trail. Behind them the wind picked up again, carrying away the sound of pain and leaving only the rhythm of hooves and the promise of something new. And though she didn't know his name, she already knew one thing about the man who had saved her. He wasn't just a cowboy. He was a kind of man the world didn't make anymore. The trail to the cowboy's cabin was long and quiet. The sun had already slipped below the horizon, leaving the world painted in deep blue and gray. The girl walked behind him, her bare feet aching, her heart still pounding from what had happened. Every step felt heavy, but something inside her kept her moving. Maybe it was hope. Or maybe it was the memory of the man who had stood between her and the whip. The cowboy rode his brown horse slowly, not saying a word. From time to time, he glanced back to make sure she was still there. When he saw her struggling to keep up, he stopped and nodded toward the saddle. "You can ride," he said simply. She hesitated. I don't know how." "That's all right," he replied. "You just hold on." He helped her up gently, his hand steady but careful as if afraid she might break. Once she was seated, he walked beside the horse, leading it through the dusty path. The night grew colder, and the sound of crickets filled the silence. For the first time in a long while, the girl felt something soft. Peace. After some time, they reached a small clearing by a creek. The moonlight shimmered on the water, and there, standing quiet among the trees, was a small wooden cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a faint orange glow came through the window. It wasn't much, just wood, stone, and roof, but to her, it looked like a castle. The cowboy tied the horse near the fence and opened the door. "Come in," he said. The girl stepped inside slowly. The warmth of the fire hit her face, and for a moment she closed her eyes, letting the comfort sink in. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and coffee. There was a table, a small bed in the corner, and shelves filled with old books and tools. It was quiet but not empty. It felt alive. "You can sit there," he said, pointing to a chair near the fire. "I'll get some water." She sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her eyes wandered around the room. Everything looked worn but cared for. There was a blanket folded neatly on the bed, and a photograph on the shelf, an old black and white picture of a woman holding a baby. She looked at it curiously but didn't ask. When he came back, he handed her a cup of warm water. She took it carefully, her fingers trembling. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, then crouched by the fire, stirring something in a pot. The smell of soup filled the air, simple and earthy. "You hungry?" he asked. Her stomach answered before her mouth could. He smiled faintly and handed her a bowl. She ate slowly at first, then faster, tears filling her eyes again. Not from sadness this time, but from the strange comfort of being treated like a person again. After a while, she looked up at him. "Why did you help me?" she asked quietly. "You didn't even know me." He didn't answer right away. He just stared into the fire, the flames dancing in his eyes. "Because nobody else did," he said at last. The words hung in the air, heavy and true. The girl lowered her gaze. She wanted to tell him her story, that she had no family, that she'd been running from men like the one he shot, that she hadn't slept without fear in months, but her voice wouldn't come. Instead, she just whispered, "I don't even know your name." He glanced up. "Most just call me Luke," he said. "And you?" She hesitated. "Mara." He nodded once, then stood. "You can take the bed." "I'll sleep by the fire." Her eyes widened. "No, I can sleep on the floor." He raised a hand, cutting her off. "You've had enough pain for one lifetime, Mara. Rest." His voice was firm but kind. She didn't argue again. She lay down on the small bed, pulling the rough blanket over herself. The fire crackled softly, and outside the wind whispered through the trees. Luke sat in the chair by the fire, silent, cleaning his revolver. The golden light flickered across his tired face. Mara watched him for a long time before her eyes grew heavy. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of it. She whispered softly before sleep took her. "Thank you, Luke." He didn't look up, but there was a small smile beneath his hat's shadow. "Sleep, Mara, you're safe now." And with that, the long night passed quietly in the little cabin by the creek. Two lost souls sharing warmth, unknowingly beginning a bond that would change both their lives forever. When morning came, the light slipped through the cracks in the wooden walls, soft and golden. The smell of smoke and coffee filled the cabin. Birds sang outside, and the creek murmured gently nearby. For the first time in a long while, Mara woke without fear. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking at the ceiling made of rough pine wood. It took her a few seconds to remember where she was, to realize that she wasn't in that cruel place anymore. The sound of boots outside told her Luke was already awake. She sat up, her hair messy, her face still pale but calmer. Through the small window, she saw him sitting on a log by the creek, fixing a saddle strap. His hat was tipped low, the sunlight painting a halo around his shoulders. He looked peaceful, like he belonged to the land itself, strong, silent, steady. Mara stepped outside quietly, hugging herself against the cool morning air. The ground was damp from the dew, and the smell of wildflowers mixed with smoke. She stood there for a moment, not sure if she should speak. But Luke noticed her anyway. He didn't turn, but his voice came calm and low. "Morning," he said. She smiled faintly. "Morning." He looked up then, his blue eyes kind but unreadable. "There's coffee on the stove." Might be bitter, though. She gave a small laugh, the first real one in a long time. I don't mind bitter, she said softly. Inside, she poured herself a cup, careful not to spill. The cabin felt warmer now, less like a stranger's home and more like a place where she could breathe. She sipped the coffee and grimaced. It was bitter, but she didn't care. It tasted like peace. When she came back outside, Luke was oiling his revolver. The metal glinted in the sun, and she felt a strange comfort knowing that the same gun had saved her. You live out here alone? She asked after a moment. He nodded. Mostly got the horse for company. Sometimes a trader passes by, but it's been months. Don't you get lonely? She asked. He paused, setting the gun down. Sometimes, he admitted. But I've learned to live with silence. It's not as cruel as people can be. His words sank deep into her. She looked at him, really looked, and realized something. His loneliness wasn't empty. It was quiet, yes, but not broken. It was the kind of silence that came after surviving storms. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself. I used to think silence was the worst thing in the world, she said softly. Now I think it's the only thing that doesn't hurt. Luke glanced at her. You've been through a lot, he said quietly. Mara looked down, her voice trembling. They took everything from me. My family, my home. I tried to run. But there's nowhere to go when everyone looks the other way. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, You ran, and you're still here. That says something. She looked up at him, confused. It means you didn't give up, he said. And that's more than most. His voice wasn't soft, but it carried a strange kindness, a belief that felt real. And somehow it reached the part of her that still wanted to live. They sat there for a while, saying nothing, listening to the creak and the rustle of the wind through the trees. The quiet didn't feel heavy anymore, it felt healing. Later, Luke showed her how to feed the horse, how to brush its mane. The animal, a gentle brown mare, snorted softly and leaned into her hand. Mara smiled. She's beautiful, she whispered. Name's Willow, Luke said. Strong and stubborn like you. Mara laughed again, the sound soft and shy. For a moment, she almost forgot the scars on her heart. By evening, the sky turned gold again. They ate soup by the fire, just like the night before. But this time there was no silence between them, just quiet comfort. When she finished eating, she looked at Luke across the firelight. You didn't have to save me, she said suddenly. You could have just ridden away. He met her gaze. I did, he said simply. She frowned. Why? Because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. The flames crackled, and for a moment she saw something in his eyes, a shadow of pain, maybe from his own past. But he looked away, not wanting her to see. Mara didn't ask again. She didn't need to. She understood now that sometimes people didn't save others because they were heroes. They did it because once, someone had saved them. That night, when she lay on the small bed again, she whispered a quiet thank you to the dark, not just for the roof above her head, but for the man who reminded her that kindness still existed, even in the loneliest corners of the world. Outside, the creek sang softly and the stars blinked above the cabin. For the first time in years, Mara felt something she thought she'd lost forever. Hope. The next morning began calm and clear. The sky was soft blue and the air smelled of rain that never came. Mara helped Luke chop wood behind the cabin. She was learning fast, how to swing the axe, how to balance her weight, how to breathe before each strike. Luke watched her silently, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. You're getting better, he said. She wiped the sweat from her forehead and grinned. Maybe I'll be stronger than you soon. He chuckled quietly. Maybe so. For a while everything felt peaceful. The days had a rhythm now. Morning chores, lunch by the creek, quiet evenings by the fire. Mara started to hum sometimes when she worked. Small songs she half remembered from childhood. Luke would listen but never said anything. It was enough for him to see her smile again. But peace, as Luke knew too well, never lasted long in their kind of world. That afternoon, as the sun climbed high and the air turned heavy, Luke's horse began to snort nervously. He stopped what he was doing, eyes narrowing. Horses always knew before men did. Mara noticed the change too. What's wrong? She asked. He didn't answer. He walked to the porch, grabbed his rifle from beside the door and looked toward the horizon. His jaw tightened. There, far in the distance, 3 riders were coming fast, dust rising behind them. Their dark shapes moved like wolves on the hunt. Luke's voice came calm but sharp. "Get inside, Mara, now!" Her heart jumped. "Who are they?" "Trouble," he said simply. She hesitated, fear flooding back into her chest, but the look in his eyes told her not to argue. She ran inside, shutting the door, her hands shaking. From the window, she saw him load his rifle with smooth, practiced motions. There was no fear in his face, only focus. The riders came closer. When they stopped at the fence, Mara saw their faces. Hard, mean, sunburnt men with cold eyes. One of them spat into the dirt. "Afternoon, Cowboy," the leader called out, voice dripping with mockery. "Heard you shot one of our boys last week." Luke didn't lower his rifle. He had it coming. The man grinned, showing yellow teeth. "Maybe he did. But we don't take kindly to strangers killing our own." "Then you'd best leave before I have to make it too," Luke said flatly. The three men laughed. The sound was ugly, cruel. Mara's heart pounded as she crouched behind the window watching. She wanted to scream, to tell Luke to come inside, but her voice was stuck. The leader reached for his gun and the world exploded in sound. Luke's rifle fired first. The man's hat flew off as he tumbled backward from his horse. The other two drew fast, returning fire, bullets cracking through the air. Mara ducked, covering her ears as glass shattered behind her. Luke moved with deadly calm, firing again, then rolling behind a barrel near the porch. One bullet grazed his arm, tearing through his sleeve. He didn't flinch. Another man fell from his horse, clutching his chest. The last one cursed loudly and turned his horse around, galloping away as fast as he could. And just like that, the silence returned. Only the wind and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. Mara stayed frozen for a moment, then rushed out. "Luke!" she cried. He was standing by the fence, breathing hard, rifle still in his hands. Blood stained his sleeve, but he was alive. When she reached him, she grabbed his arm, tears brimming in her eyes. "You're hurt." He shook his head. "Just a scratch." She looked up at him, her voice breaking. "They could have killed you." He met her gaze, his tone gentle but steady. "I've been shot at before, Mara. I don't plan on dying today." Her hands trembled as she tied a piece of cloth around his arm. He didn't stop her. His eyes stayed fixed on the open plain, watching the dust fade where the last man had fled. "They won't stop," she said quietly. "He'll bring more." Luke nodded slowly. "Maybe, but not tonight." That night, the cabin felt smaller, surrounded by silence. Mara sat by the fire, staring into the flames, her heart still racing. Luke sat across from her, cleaning his gun in slow motions, the light flickering across his tired face. "Why do people like that always come back?" she asked softly. He looked up at her. "Because they think fear makes them powerful," he said. "But they've never met someone who doesn't scare easy." Mara held his gaze. "You're not afraid of anything, are you?" Luke smiled faintly, shaking his head. "Everyone's afraid of something. I just don't let it stop me." The fire crackled between them, warm and bright against the dark night outside. For the first time, Mara realized something. The world was cruel, yes, but there were still people who stood against it. People like Luke, who fought not for glory, but for what was right. And as the wind howled outside the cabin walls, she made herself a quiet promise. She would learn to be brave too. The morning after the gunfight came with a heavy stillness. The air smelled of smoke and rain that never fell. Mara woke early, her mind still filled with flashes of last night. The gunfire, the shouting, the fear. But when she stepped outside, she found Luke already awake. Sitting on the porch steps, one arm bandaged, his rifle resting across his knees. He looked calm, almost peaceful, as if danger had simply become another part of his life. "You should be resting," she said quietly. He gave her a small smile. "I've had worse." Mara frowned. "That's not something to be proud of." Luke chuckled softly, the sound low and kind. "Maybe not. But it means I'm still here." For a while, neither of them spoke. The sun rose higher, lighting the creek that ran behind the cabin. Birds sang, unaware of how close death had come the night before. Mara watched Luke carefully as he cleaned his rifle again, his movements slow and precise. She saw the scars on his hands, the faint tremor when he flexed his arm, the way his eyes stayed sharp and watchful even in peace. He wasn't just a cowboy. He was a man who carried his past like a weight, heavy but hidden. Later that morning, Mara insisted on helping with chores. Luke tried to stop her, but she was stubborn. "If I'm staying here, I should do my share," she said. So they worked together. She fetched water from the creek, chopped wood, and even tried cooking. though the first batch of cornbread turned out burnt. Luke pretended to eat it anyway. "It's terrible," she said, laughing. He shrugged. "I've had worse." They both laughed then, real laughter that echoed through the trees. It was small, but it meant something. For the first time, Mara didn't feel like a lost child. She felt useful, alive. Days turned into weeks, and life began to take on a rhythm again. Luke taught her how to ride his horse, Willow. At first she was scared, gripping the reins too tight. But Luke's calm voice guided her through every step. "Don't fight the horse," he said. "Just trust her." "I don't know if I can," Mara said nervously. "You can," he replied, his voice firm. Trust isn't about never being scared. It's about holding on anyway. It took time, but she learned. The first time Willow carried her across the open field, wind in her hair, sun on her face, Mara felt something she hadn't in years. Freedom. When she dismounted, Luke was watching her from the fence, arms crossed, a proud look in his eyes. "You did good," he said simply. She smiled, breathless. "You sound surprised." "I'm not," he said. "I just wanted to see you smile like that." His words made her heart skip. She didn't know what to say, so she just looked away, cheeks warm. That evening they sat by the creek as the sky turned pink and gold. Luke was sharpening his knife and Mara was washing clothes in the cold water. "Luke," she said softly, "you've done so much for me. I don't even know how to thank you." He didn't look up. "You don't have to, but I want to," she insisted. "You could have left me that day." "You didn't." He paused, his reflection rippling in the water. "Because once someone didn't leave me either." Mara turned to him. "What happened?" Luke sighed, the kind of sigh that carries years of silence. "There was a war long ago. Lost people, lost things. When I came home, I wasn't much different than you, angry, tired, ready to give up. Then a stranger helped me, gave me food, a place to rest. Never asked for anything in return. It's how I learned that kindness isn't weakness, it's strength." Mara's throat tightened. "So that's why you helped me?" He nodded slowly. "Because someone once believed I was worth saving. Now it's my turn." For a long moment neither spoke. The sound of the creek filled the space between them, soft and endless. Finally Mara said, "I want to learn from you. Not just how to ride or shoot, but how to live like that. How to be strong and kind at the same time." Luke smiled faintly. "You're already halfway there." That night Mara looked out through the cabin window at the stars. She thought about the girl she had been, the one trembling under the whip, and the person she was becoming now. There was still fear inside her, yes, but there was also courage growing slowly beside it, and it was because of one man who had shown her that decency still existed in the wild world. As the firelight flickered against the walls, she whispered a quiet promise to herself. Someday she would repay him, not with words, but with the same kind of bravery he had given her. The bravery to stand against darkness and protect someone else. Outside, the creek kept singing, and for the first time, the cabin by the creek didn't just feel like a shelter. It felt like home. Weeks passed, and the world around the cabin began to change. The air grew warmer, and the wildflowers bloomed along the creek. The days were peaceful, filled with simple work and quiet moments. But inside Mara's heart, something restless began to stir. Each morning, she looked toward the distant hills, the same direction from where she had once come, broken and lost. Now they didn't seem so far anymore. One afternoon, while Luke was mending a fence, Mara stood near the barn, her hands twisting nervously. She had made her decision, though it hurt more than she expected. When Luke finally came back inside, she spoke softly. "Luke, I think it's time I go." The hammer froze in his hand. He turned slowly, his eyes calm but shadowed with something heavy. "Go?" She nodded, her voice trembling. "I've been thinking. I can't stay hidden here forever. I need to see the world again, to find my place in it." Luke set the hammer down. "You're sure about this?" "I am," she whispered. "You saved me when I was at my worst. But now I want to live for real. I want to help others the way you helped me." Luke looked at her for a long time, the light from the window outlining his tired face. "You've grown," he said quietly. "I knew this day would come." Mara swallowed hard. "I just didn't think it would hurt this much." He smiled sadly. "That's what happens when something good finds its way into your life. It hurts to let it go." That night neither of them slept much. The air was thick with silence and unspoken words. Mara packed what little she owned, Some clothes, a small knife Luke had given her, and a piece of cloth she had embroidered with a tiny star. When morning came, she stepped outside. The sun painted the valley in gold. Luke stood by the fence, his hat low over his eyes. A horse saddled beside him. He had packed a small bag for her, dried food, a canteen, a blanket. "You'll need these," he said. Mara's eyes filled with tears. "You thought of everything." "Old habit," he said softly. "I've seen too many people go out there unprepared." She wanted to say so much, to thank him for every moment, every lesson, every kindness, but the words wouldn't come. Luke stepped closer and put a rough hand on her shoulder. "You don't owe me anything, Mara. You already gave me more than you think." She frowned through her tears. "What do you mean?" He smiled faintly. "You reminded me that life isn't just about surviving. It's about saving what's left of our hearts." Her lips trembled. "You talk like you've already said goodbye 100 times. He chuckled softly. "Maybe I have." For a moment they just stood there watching the sun climb higher. The creek whispered nearby, and the wind moved through the grass like a quiet song. Finally, Mara stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. It was a quick, clumsy hug, but it said everything. "Thank you, Luke," she whispered, "for everything." He hesitated for a second before returning the embrace gently. "You'll do fine, girl. Just remember, keep your heart steady and your hands clean. The world's rough, but it ain't unbeatable." When she pulled away, her eyes were shining with tears and courage. She climbed onto the horse, her small figure framed by the morning light. Luke stepped back, tipping his hat. "Ride safe." She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Then she turned the horse toward the open road. The path ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time she didn't feel afraid. Every sound, every scent of the wild world seemed sharper, brighter. She was free and strong. As she rode farther, she looked back one last time. Luke was still there, standing by the fence, a quiet figure against the rising sun. He raised his hand in farewell, and she raised hers too before turning away. Miles passed. The cabin became smaller behind her, then vanished beyond the trees. But she carried it inside her. The warmth of the fire, the sound of the creek, the quiet strength of the man who had believed in her when no one else did. She knew their paths might never cross again. But deep down she felt something unspoken, that this goodbye wasn't truly the end, because people like Luke didn't disappear. They lived on through the lives they saved, in the courage they left behind. And as the wind brushed her face, Mara whispered into the open air, "I'll make you proud." Somewhere far behind her, in the cabin by the creek, Luke looked toward the hills where she had vanished and smiled. He didn't need to see her again to know she would keep that promise, because he had seen it. The same fire he once lost, now burning in her eyes, and for the first time in years the old cowboy felt peace. Years passed. The seasons came and went, painting the land in gold, then white, then green again. The cabin by the creek grew older, its wood darker, its roof patched with care. Inside, Luke still lived his quiet life, tending to the land, mending fences, talking to the horses like old friends. He had grown slower now. His beard was gray, and his hands, once strong and steady, trembled a little when he held his cup of coffee in the morning. But his eyes, those sharp, kind eyes, still held their fire. Sometimes he thought of the girl he once saved, Mara, the little runaway with a spirit too wild to be broken. He had watched her ride away into the sunrise years ago, her heart full of dreams. He wondered where she was now. Maybe she'd found a town, a family, a purpose. Maybe she'd forgotten him. And yet, on quiet nights when the wind moved through the valley, he would swear he heard her laughter echo faintly through the trees. Then one evening, as the sky burned orange and red, a sound broke the calm, the soft rhythm of hooves on the dirt road. Luke turned his head. It had been years since anyone rode that way. A rider appeared at the crest of the hill. For a moment, Luke thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. The figure rode with confidence, back straight, reins firm, a long coat trailing in the wind. When the rider came closer, Luke froze. It was her. Mara dismounted slowly, her boots touching the earth with quiet grace. She was taller now, stronger. The frightened girl was gone. In her place stood a woman with steady eyes and a calm, brave heart. "Evening, Luke," she said softly. He didn't move at first. His throat tightened as if time had folded in on itself. "Mara," he whispered. "Well, I'll be damned." She smiled through tears. You look just the same. Maybe a little older. He chuckled weakly. Takes one to notice. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Two souls who had once shared pain, hope, and silence under the same roof. Come inside, he said finally. Before the wind eats us both alive. Inside the cabin, everything was almost the same. The wooden table, the rocking chair, even the old rifle above the fireplace. Mara ran her fingers over the worn edges. I miss this place, she said quietly. Luke poured her coffee, his hand shaking slightly. So, he said, settling down. Where'd life take you, girl? She smiled, her eyes distant. I went east. Found work teaching at a small-town school. Taught the kids how to read, how to fight fair, how to stand tall. Sometimes, I even told them about a cowboy who once taught me the same. Luke looked down, hiding the emotion in his eyes. Sounds like you did all right. I tried, she said softly. And I never forgot you. The fire crackled between them. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was warm, filled with all the words that didn't need to be said. After a while, Luke's voice grew quiet. I always hoped you'd find your way back here. Guess I was right. Mara looked at him, her eyes glistening. I made a promise once. I told myself I'd return when I could stand as strong as you did. When I could say thank you. Properly, he smiled faintly. You already did years ago. When you rode off into the world and didn't give up. Her hand trembled as she reached across the table and placed it over his. No. You gave me a reason to live when I had none. You taught me what kindness means. You showed me that good men still exist. Luke's voice cracked softly. And you showed me that the world can still heal. Outside, the night deepened, and the stars began to appear. The same stars that had once watched over a broken girl and a lonely cowboy. Later, Mara stepped outside with him. The creek still sang its eternal song. Luke leaned on the fence, his gaze distant. You planning to stay a while? He asked. She smiled. As long as you'll have me. He gave a small nod, his eyes soft. Then the cabin's yours too. That night, for the first time in years, the cabin glowed brighter. Not just from firelight, but from something deeper. Two lives once lost had found each other again. Not by fate, but by the quiet strength of love, trust, and human kindness. And as the stars shimmered over the valley, Mara whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude for the whip that didn't break her, for the road that tested her, and for the man who taught her what it meant to be free. Inside, Luke smiled faintly before closing his eyes, peace finally settling over his tired soul. The old cowboy had saved a life once, and that life had come back to save his heart. The end.